Hey, it's Trevor Grant from Revenue Hub. Today we're joined by three guests. David Lopez, Chief Science Officer at PACE, Maxime Cohen, Associate Professor at McGill University, and Nancy Pyron, Analytics, Strategic and Organizational Consultant at NMP Consulting. In today's video, we discuss elements of a white paper our three guests have recently authored, looking at statistical field experimentation or lack thereof for testing revenue strategies in the hospitality industry. We touch on what field experimentation is, indicative scenarios where it could prove valuable, practical challenges faced, and experimental designs to address these challenges. I hope the discussion is of interest, and please feel free to comment below. We're always interested in your thoughts and views. Finally, as always, if you're keen to hear more from thought leaders in the hotel and travel sector, please subscribe to the channel. Click that bell so you know when we have new content. And if you like what we're doing, please give a thumbs up, as it really helps the channel. Anyway, hope you enjoy it. Roll the intro. Before we get into the white paper discussion, let's first hear from our guests, David Lopez, Maxime Cohen, and Nancy Pyron.
Yes, Trevor. So I'm David Lopez. I'm the chief scientist at PACE Revenue. You might know of PACE. We offer revenue solutions, including pricing and other solutions, some of which we might touch a little bit on when we talk about the paper. And my background, I joined PACE like about 2.5 years ago. My background is not in revenue management, it's in particle physics, actually. And I came to this as a modeler, somebody who wants to try to use novel techniques of modeling to change revenue management. And you know, a lot of the things that came along the way also were not just about modeling, but also about experimentation and statistics, which is something I think what we will be touching more on today.
Yes, so my name is Maxime Cohen. I'm an associate professor of retail management and operations management at McGill University in Canada. And I'm also the co-director of the McGill Retail Innovation Lab. And my background is in operation research, and in particular in pricing and revenue management. So I've been working with several companies, helping them to exploit the granularity of the data they collect and to transform some large data sets into improving operational decisions, in particular pricing and revenue management. And I've been doing some work recently with several companies on running field experiments.
My name is Nancy Pyron, and I've had the joy and opportunity of being in revenue management systems since 1997. I have had the great fortune to be everything from sitting behind the scenes building models to interacting with customers, doing training, to doing requirements, to doing full implementations and build of a brand new system. I am very, very excited about being on this paper, and I think there's a lot of opportunities we have to express to other people in the hospitality environment and beyond about how to do testing and the benefits it can bring to their system.
As we look to get into the white paper discussion, let's first hear from David Lopez as to what was the rationale behind putting the white paper together.
The title of the paper is Field Experimentation or Lack of Thereof in the Hospitality Industry to test for testing revenue strategies. Mm-hmm. And this is a topic that actually I became interested in very quickly, very soon after I started working for PACE. Because in the hospitality industry, anybody who has worked on revenue management knows that it is not obvious to prove that one revenue strategy, one algorithm is better than another. Obviously, as somebody who's building an algorithm, the answer to that question, how do I improve incrementally my algorithm is very interesting. So we started thinking about that quite some time ago, and that's how we came into field experiments as really sort of like the gold standard for causal inference, which is what you would do if you wanted to show that this algorithm that you just developed is better than this other one. So that's sort of like the background. And earlier this year, as COVID was hitting, we thought that some of the work that I had been doing in the algorithm was coming to an end, and we thought that it was a good time for me to start spending some more time on these evaluations. And the first point was to see what was available in the industry, what people were doing, and very quickly we saw that there was not very much. Which is when I got in touch with Nancy first, and then with Maxime, who I had met before, and I knew was an expert on this. He had done these kind of experiments in other industries, and we thought, well, maybe there needs to be that first paper that says this is important, this needs to be done, and by the way, these are some ways we could go about doing it.
Yeah, I was going to ask, was there any publicly documented work around this topic before in this particular space, or you say there the first paper?
As we were writing the paper, we found two references that actually did document some experiments that have been done in the past. The truth is that very few experiments have been done in the hospitality industry. Some big chains have done them. Mm-hmm. When they upgrade their revenue management systems, they will do a small test or sometimes not so small. But it's not widespread and it's not well documented. Even the two references that we found, they didn't go into a lot of details. So we thought that there was really a need for expose this field as something, or this topic as something important, something that requires a conversation and wider conversation within the industry and also within the academics that work in this industry.
So let's get into the first section. In this section, we hear from Maxime and David about what statistical field experimentation is, and is it another term for A/B testing or something more than that?
So indeed, as you say, Trevor, field experimentation and A/B testing is very similar. It's really like two different words of saying almost the same thing. Mm-hmm. Now, A/B testing, typically you compare two different options, A and B. Field experimentation is slightly more general when you can compare more than two options. Now, as you said, I think I'm always excited to write a paper, which is a collaboration effort between academia and industry, because I feel like you can target a wider audience. And I think this paper is definitely into this category where we could leverage my co-authors' expertise from industry, adding on top the academic background that I brought to the picture, I think was a very good combination. Now, we wanted to give a little bit of an introduction and an explanation of how is it possible to use those type of field experimentation in order to test different revenue strategy on the field for the hospitality industry. As David mentioned before, it was done quite a bit in many other fields. So there is a lot of platforms. Think about platforms like Amazon or Netflix or Uber, Airbnb. They've been testing different ideas by running an experimentation. But we believe that in the hotel industry, it was a little bit more limited. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to shed light a little bit about why is it limited and how can we overcome the existing challenges in order to bring this big practice. Now, just to say another point, why this practice is good, in my opinion, is the fact that this is kind of the best way to test new ideas. Mm-hmm. You have a new revenue system that you want to implement, or you have a new price discount that you want to offer to your customers. So the best way to do it is just to test it on the field. And that's why it's called field experimentation, because we experiment on it.
Got you.
Now, it sounds nice and easy, but as we discussed in the paper, actually to design a careful experiment that can allow you to tease out the effect of exactly what you are changing is actually fairly intricate. And in the paper, we talk more about the details on how to properly design such an experiment in order to learn the most from the results.
No, that makes sense. And if I could just draw you back, you spoke about the likes of Amazon and Netflix and Uber. If you could just, one of you, either of you, just sort of touch on how it is being utilized in, let's say, non-hospitality, and then we'll look at where are we seeing it within the hospitality space. So looking outside of hospitality, where is it being utilized? How is it being utilized at the moment?
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in here on this one. So in fact, for most online applications, field experiment is widely used. Mm-hmm. And one of the best use case scenario is user interface. So you go to a website, you want to show an ad to a user, an advertisement. you can decide the color of the advertisement, blue versus red. In that case, the best way to do it is just to test. People will come to your website, you'll draw at random, 50% chance to show red ad or blue ad, and then you can infer which one works most by counting the number of people clicking on the ad. So that's one use case. Yep. Now, if you extrapolate a little bit on this use case, any user interface, the size of the font, the color of the font, the locations of different items on the website, this has been a very traditional application of field experiments used by many websites. Now, Amazon similarly can do the same. It can recommend you several items when you check out. It can offer you a list of different items, different prices, different type of user interfaces. Similarly with Uber, it can do on prices, on referral behavior. So you just name it. Netflix can decide which picture to show you to attract you to watch a movie, and so on and so forth.
In hospitality, if you want us to move to that part of the question, in marketing departments, this is something that has been used. A lot of CRM systems will come with ways of splitting, for instance, your emails, the email format in order to do A/B tests. So you will send, half your customers, you'll send them one email and the other half another one, and check which one works better in terms of people clicking or people reading the email. The reality is that when you move from the marketing departments, and by the way, we don't have a full picture, and Nancy helped in this, of course, because she's worked with a lot of clients, but we don't have a full picture of how much it's actually used in marketing departments. Okay. We know that CRM systems offer it, so presumably it is used. But we don't know the degree of penetration within the industry.
I'm with you. So the technology is there, but the degree to which it is used to actually run even the simple A/B tests is still up for debate.
Yeah, so we don't know that yet. But we believe that any chain that is big enough to have somebody devoted to marketing will be doing some amount of A/B testing at the marketing level.
And sorry, go on. No, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Then when you move to other departments, in particular, we were interested in revenue because it's such a complex dynamics of revenue. The algorithms are becoming ever more complex, and there is a lot of noise about what helps and doesn't help. So when you actually move to revenue, which seems a great candidate, it's after all a quantitative discipline. The most quantitative people in the hotels are going to be in the revenue department. But when you move to that department, what we know from experience, from talking to clients, is that really only a few big chains have ever done A/B testing or field experiments, and when they do, it's not very frequent.
Have we seen it utilized within the likes of OTA, so Expedia or Booking.com, and obviously Airbnb have been pretty innovative and disruptive? Have we seen it in those areas at all?
So, of course, Airbnb in their product design, and this is mentioned in the paper, and there is the documentation, they've been very vocal about their use of field experiments. So we know that in product design or marketing, they definitely used it. We also know from people who we know there that Airbnb has a pricing recommendation engine, and the users don't need to accept those prices. So it is a little bit hard to run an experiment when on revenue when the users sometimes accept the prices and sometimes not. Yeah. But we know that they have that, and then they have run some experiments on that based on also some publications that they've put out. But there are not a lot of details. No. You will just find a line or two on a paper that says, and this has been A/B tested. So on pricing, we know that Airbnb doesn't very much, and what they do is not public. Booking.com and Expedia, similarly, particularly Booking.com has very much publicized their culture of experimentation in the company, but they don't have price control. Okay. For the most part. So This is something that is very important when we talk about revenue strategies, which is who sets the price, and most of the time is the hotels. The OTAs do sometimes work on an agency model, and sometimes they can offer bundles in that model, and then they do have control over pricing. And I know from conversations with data scientists from these companies that when they offer bundles, they do A/B test whether they should offer these or that. But that's not their main business.
Sure.
The main business in revenue is coming from, or the main revenue streams are coming from the hotels, who are the ones who set the prices. So the impact is not all that big, and it is not publicly documented or discussed, really.
That makes sense. Would we see them using it a lot more? Would they be maybe more innovative around the user experience, the user interface in the way that they're using this field testing? Would that be an area where they are, I hate to use the word superior, but maybe advanced around these techniques than maybe the traditional hotel companies? Would that be fair?
That's what they typically talk about. So
Okay.
whenever you look at what has been documented, you will see that they talk about how they use this to improve the website, to improve conversion, to improve click-through rates, things like that. So I think that's a fair statement.
That makes sense. Maxime, you were nodding away there as well. That was your kind of conclusion too, yeah?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything David said. I think like the two main lessons are the fact that those type of platforms like Expedia, Airbnb have been widely using experimentation, but not really for testing revenue strategy. As David said, the price is typically controlled by the hotels. They don't have any control on pricing, and therefore they cannot do some A/B testing on pricing.
Yeah.
And the second point is, even if these companies are routinely using some type of experimentation, they are not keen on publishing the result and elaborating on the details online. So it's very hard to transfer this knowledge for smaller hotels or smaller companies that also want to learn from those experimentation to also use this practice for their businesses.
In this second section, we hear from Nancy and David, who outline 6 indicative scenarios where statistical field experimentation could be beneficial to the hotel sector.
For ancillary pricing, when we think of ancillary pricing, it's really all of the, in the airline industry, it became really obvious and prevalent when they started charging per bag. And when you start charging per bag, and when they started charging to change your flight on the same day. So those two things, which had always been free, really started impacting, the hotel's revenues, because their revenue stream went up because people were not going to change the way they packed their bags.
Sure.
And they also, for some hotel or for some guests traveling, they needed to be able to take an earlier flight. So it became encouraging to say, oh, if I get status, I'm going to be able to change my flight for free. And I fly so much that before I was picking the cheapest flight, now I want to be able to change my flight for free. Well, that ancillary revenue was obviously modeled, and it was there was testing that was done, and an evaluation to determine that the people that would be impacted by this, it's going to become industry-wide. So it's going to become white noise. Mm-hmm. And the same thing has happened in the hotel industry. Whenever you think about things, not just breakfast or parking, but things like the internet charges, and even some of the hotels have health club fees where you have to pay a small fee, maybe $5 to use the health club. So there's a lot of things that you have to do a lot of testing, and you want to evaluate the impact that it's going to have on your guests. So you don't want to roll out a property-wide or distributed rule that's going to impact your guests without understanding the sensitivity associated with that. Resort fees is a perfect example as well, because resort fees started truly in resorts where, it's all right, $29 a day, I'm already paying, I want to stay at this place and I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I understand it's for the internet and it's for breakfast and it's for a drink at night. But then resort fees have now become prevalent across all hotels that are not resorts. And so how is that impacting the guest experience? And a lot of this was the result of testing in some hotel chains, and maybe in other hotel chains, it was just, that sounds like a great idea. Let's throw that resort fee on. And because they didn't do any testing, it was met with extremely negative feedback. So there's a lot of great ideas that people have to make more money, but without doing adequate testing, you can present such a bad user experience that you end up losing a customer base that you had previously relied on.
Makes sense.
Distribution channel optimization. There's a couple of different ways that I think of this, and the one that I'm going to focus on is the one that we actually did some studies in a previous lifetime and found a huge revenue opportunity, which was just the ordering in your view of how users see rooms. So when they pick a date and they go to a screen, that I believe it was actually Kelly McGuire that had done a study that indicated that if you have the exact same room type descriptions and the exact same prices, if the users see a more expensive room first in the list, they are 60% more likely to select that room than if they see the cheaper room first in the list.
Wow.
So just your room selection, and this was done through A/B testing. And it's not something where you're changing prices. You're not changing prices. You're not changing pictures. You're not changing descriptions. You're literally changing the room type order on your screen. And we implemented this for one of our premium hotels, and it generated incremental measurable revenue. It is amazing because people perceive a value, and then to go away from that value, they're taking away something from their experience.
Yeah.
Right? But if they just say, oh, there's the room, I can book the room, oh, I have to pay more to get these other features, then it's a different perception of worth and value and how they see themselves. So it's been, it's little things like that. It's using your imagination and trying to understand the psychology of how people perceive things and how people value worth that's really made a huge difference in a lot of these environments.
I think in this context, when we were talking about distribution, we were also discussing the different kind of fees that different OTAs are going to charge for the distribution, and how you might be able to design an experiment that will tell you how actually, sometimes you keep both OTAs or both big OTAs open because you believe that that you need that for volume. Mm-hmm. It might be that you don't. And particularly as Google becomes a bigger player as a search engine, it's unclear whether you need to keep those channels open or whether you can keep them open but do not pay the extra to the OTAs. So those are things that are actually, in terms of value, very large because the commissions are very large that are paid to the OTA. So and 2% more or less commission or closing this OTA to which I'm paying more can have a very large impact, and it's something that you can test as a strategy also with revenue without just changing the revenue. Which distribution channels you leave open, as opposed to even changing anything on your website. So I think that is a place where we identify there is a lot of potential for revenue.
Good point.
Yeah. And I knew you were going to cover that, so I didn't want to double cover.
Well, I always like all these stories because Nancy knows more about the industry than I or Maxime or maybe probably even Trevor knows. So it's definitely puts things into a perspective that I don't have.
I agree. It's great to hear the stories.
I'm going to let her keep going.
Back over
you
to
can
Maxime.
edit me out. So the next one is promotion success, and we did a really interesting analysis where we took the promotions and the attributes of those promotions and mapped that back to the emails that were sent. And we were able to generate an 80% more effective turnaround on our promotions with the same number of emails sent, because we were able to use machine learning techniques to target. And I don't think I'm supposed to use that term anymore. to identify key attributes that made that promotion interesting to that person. Mm-hmm. So instead of sending 17 emails to a person and having them just hit delete every time. We were sending 1 or 2 emails to a person, and that person was interested in resorts. They were interested in, in going to urban type settings. They were interested in traveling around the world. They were interested in family vacation packages. So we were able to identify the key attributes of what they liked in history and then really focus in that email string. And so it alleviated a lot of email fatigue and it increased our response rates. And we did that through a series of testing. So we would, we would run an analysis, do a test on the next promotion that was being sent out, and come back and run another analysis. So it was a very iterative process, but we generated a much more streamlined and targeted approach, which benefits both the customer, the end customer, and the hotels, because you're not blasting them with so many emails that they can't they just stop looking at all those emails. So that is one area where we really found in the terms of promotions, we didn't have to change the promotions. We didn't have to offer 15% off instead of 10% off, or 3 nights, free instead of 2 nights free. We just used the same promotional structure, but we were able to market it in such a way that it was more effective for the customer base. So that was really fun.
More granular around the, as you say, utilizing the information that you've been able to pick up and the data available to you.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's a good example. And in this case, what we were proposing is an extension that does go into those details of, if it's 20%, 15%, 10%. And again, I think the main point that we were trying to make in this section of the paper was, well, what is the size of the opportunity? And you realize very quickly that actually it is very big, a difference in a promotion between 10% and 20% for, a low volume month can actually signify a significant increase in your profit. So it's something that you really want to know which level is necessary.
Yeah, because I mean, that's a good point. If you have that granular data, then the ability, and you have a system that can use it, then that's great. But obviously, if you're talking in the larger groups, that's there. Sometimes in the smaller groups or independent properties, they may not be quite as sophisticated. But even just testing, if I did a promotion and offered 10% or 15% or 10%, how much do I actually to generate that sort of conversion? Even a simple testing basis like that can still be effective as well, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing that we also found in a lot of studies that we did was you really have to find that break-even point. And I think that's where we were going with A/B testing that we specifically talked about there, which David mentioned, is that if let's say you want a 30% discount, if your volume increased, but your total revenue is basically the same, you've spent money on marketing, you spent money configuring your system, you spent money trying to figure out what that is. So you have all this money in the background that you've spent, and you basically you just are at a wash.
Yeah.
So you really have to figure out, and then I've also seen where it's like, oh, we're going to offer a 5% discount. Well, you have all of that work, but you don't generate any incremental bookings, right? So it's not enough of a discount to create a change in people's behavior. So trying to find, even if it's high level points, trying to find what that sweet spot is for your economic environment and your seasonal, if you're in Phoenix and it's 120 degrees, it's 120 degrees in Phoenix, right? And you can offer 50% discounts and you're still not going to get anybody to go. Yeah. I mean, and that we literally had hotels where we had to do tests that showed them, look, your rates are 50% off and you don't generate one incremental booking. Yeah. So you have to take into account the environmental factors and the likelihood. And this is where, your 360 data, your market share data becomes so relevant that if you're below market share, that's where you can really take advantage of doing a lot of these tests to figure out how can I get my fair share of the market that's out there.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And this touches upon an interesting point, and I think we discussed that a little bit when we were discussing the different designs that we did, which is a granularity. There are certain questions, and promotions is one of them, for which you need some certain level of granularity to understand. You need to go to the hotel level. While there are others, like one that we'll talk about in a second, I don't know where it was in the list, but obviously it's dear to my heart, which is the choice of revenue management system, which you obviously don't need necessarily a very granular solution, particularly if you're a big brand testing on an upgrade on your system for 500 properties.
Yeah.
In that case, you can just test the upgrade on all those properties. So depending on the question that you're trying to answer, your experimental design is going to have to be somewhat different.
Well, it's actually the next one on the list is choosing the revenue management system.
I see.
So you've done this before.
Well, yes, I don't know, maybe just after going through the paper so many times, eventually in the subconscious, which one goes after the other.
So do you want to take that one on then and just expand a little bit more? I mean, you've kind of touched on it there.
I'll say something about it, but I think Nancy is in a good position, because this one, to some extent, it could be the first one that you could talk about, because it's the one that I think is used the most. Like, you have a big chain, they are considering paying this much money for this new system or for this upgrade, and it's interesting for them to know what the ROI of that investment is going to be. So because the investment is large. So I think that's where you've seen it used in the past for big corporate chains, and I think Nancy can talk more about that. For smaller chains, however, I think a lot of the performance gets lost in the marketing. So somebody might choose a cheaper RMS system because it's cheaper and they think that they're saving money. But you look at a difference of performance between two RMS systems, and if it's 1%, 2%, is actually a very big difference that's making to your profit, probably a lot more than the difference in prices between RMSs. So it's something that sometimes in the smaller brands that don't necessarily have the scale, they ignore, but they shouldn't necessarily be ignoring, particularly if they could determine that difference with some precision.
No, that makes some sense. And Nancy, your kind of commentary on this?
I agree with David, and we talked a lot about this when we were writing the paper. I think of it as I think of it as three separate sets, right? You've got hotels that have no revenue management system at all. They're maybe using some Excel spreadsheets. They're maybe just setting the same price every day, and they never change that price. They have some sort of logic, but there's really no statistics behind it. So for them, getting a revenue management system could be extremely beneficial, especially if it has pricing. There's a lot of revenue management systems, and they're fewer and farther between, but that don't actually generate a price. They just generate inventory controls. And what's key to remember is that inventory controls only help you if you're sitting at 85% occupancy or above for a significant portion of the year, right? Because inventory controls is just telling you what to open and close. So if you are never above 85% occupancy, you're always open.
Yeah.
So paying money for a system that tells you to be open is not going to be a long-term benefit. And I think that was missed. And I think that was missed in a lot of sales pitches. People would get very excited and then realize down the road that, wow, this didn't help me at all. Especially, I think, the examples I know of that were hit hard in 2007, 2008 with the economic depression, hotels that had been at 100% occupancy were down at 10 to 15% occupancy because they didn't change their pricing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until a pricing system was implemented that they started seeing a turnaround in their economies and a change in the performance of their hotels. So when you go from nothing to something, it's always critical to understand, what's going to drive the revenue what are the claims, and what's going to drive the revenue? And do I have the capacity to set one hotel or two hotels aside and test out this process?
Yeah.
And whether you, and that really flows into whether you have a system and you're trying to change your system, or whether you have an existing system and they want to make an enhancement to that. To me, I've never seen an example where there was a failure result because you did testing. Mm-hmm. I've never seen it be the case where, the testing indicated that the revenue management system would not be of benefit, except in those examples where they did the testing and said, hey, wait a second, we never meet the criteria that you've given us. You said we were going to 10% revenue gain. Yeah. And now that we're going back, we aren't seeing any revenue gain. And then the vendor has to say, oh, well, that's because of these 15 criteria, which is what we based it on.
Because there's a lot of...
And so it's really...
Sorry, go.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, because there's a lot of numbers thrown out in the sales pitches, aren't they, in terms of what increase of revenue.
And they're exciting. Yes. Yes, everybody's very excited about it. Everybody's very confident. And they're very aggressive, and they want you to make a decision, and their system's going to be the best system ever. And the unfortunate thing as well, and is that what I have seen happen a lot of the time is that an executive team gets sold on the idea and thinks it's the best thing they've ever seen, and they sign all the contracts and tell all the people that work under them, okay, we bought you this new system, go implement it. Right? And all the people underneath them are like, whoa, wait, we don't, our prices don't fit into the box that this revenue management system is trying to make us fit them into, or the forecasting algorithm doesn't break apart these two very distinct demand streams, or if we don't have a group forecast, we're not going to be able to, that's 60% of our hotel space. So if we don't have a group forecast, how, and it's not washing anything, how are we supposed to figure out what the available rooms are for transient? So there's so many factors, and I think the key is always try and get at least a one or two prototype test hotel for your PMS system, for your RMS system changeovers, and make sure you understand what that benefit estimate is based on and what are the criteria, so that your hotel system can say from the get-go, wait, your criteria is based on these three factors, and we are only meeting one of those three. So reevaluate the benefit estimate for what our hotel systems do.
No, that makes sense. And listening to kind of both of you there, you've got, in simplifying it, which is what I tend to do, you've got two areas here. By running these tests, you can be testing multiple different systems, whether it's a first time or a renewal or an upgrade. But you're actually able then to test the application itself, and does it work for what you need it to do? Does it fit the criteria that you need? But then I think back to your point, David, one system may be more expensive, but if it actually delivers better and there a tangible uplift in terms of revenue generation that offsets that additional cost, then you have a clearer return on investment that you're going to get from doing it, which you won't get unless you're having some sort of comparable basis. Is that fair?
Yeah, and that's what originally got me interested in this problem. To me, it's the calculation of the ROI. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have a clear way in the hospitality industry, other than really field experiments, to do an ROI calculation for a revenue management system. And then there are other things that one can do too, but that is the one that originally got me interested.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think another one that is related, which I think is probably next in the paper, is that if you are a revenue management system software provider like Pace or any other, you should actually be quite keen on doing those tests internally. Mm-hmm. Or if you're a big chain and you have your own revenue management system, because that's going to help you improve your algorithm regularly. If I do a test against another software provider and I lose, I'll learn from that test and I'll be like, oh, there was something that we weren't doing right here, and now we can improve. And if we can do a test like that, internally, and we actually at Pace do internally, you can do a test like that every 2 months, every 3 months. Every 3 months, you learn something about how your algorithm can be improved, and then it's very hard for other providers to keep up with you. So I think there is a lot of room also. We do it, but for other software providers, there is a lot of interest and potential revenue uplift from doing this for their clients.
Yeah, I think it was the sixth point. So we've skipped ahead one, but that's fine. We can just go back. And it was around the acquiring external data and updating revenue management algorithms. So that's what you're talking to there, yeah?
Yeah, acquiring external data was one example in how you can improve your algorithm, which is quite current because obviously there are more and more data sets that are being made available and that you can buy. So you probably want to set an ROI on that investment if you're an RMS company. But in general, just updating your algorithm in any way that you deem is valuable.
No, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So then, Nancy, do you have anything to add on to that, or should I move us on to the fifth one, which we'll cover off last, which is the price update frequency? Was there, before I skip ahead, was there anything around the algorithm piece that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I think again, this is a critical conceptual thought as well, because if you're a hotel and you have 40 hotels and you've contracted with a third-party vendor, and they're telling you that they're going to push out a price algorithm change. Hopefully they're going to tell you. And you go back and ask them, okay, what testing did you do? And if their response is, well, what do you mean we didn't do any? It's a better idea. We had this brilliant idea, and so we're pushing out this change.
Yeah.
If they haven't done any testing, you need to push back on that vendor, because I cannot tell you how many brilliant ideas have not generated any incremental revenue, but have generated, it takes twice as long to do your processing because the algorithm is twice as complex, right? You go from a linear to a nonlinear optimization. You have 15 factors instead of one. You have a machine learning instead of a statistics-based, just a regression-based algorithm. So there's so many things that sound brilliant and sound great. I'm going to take your prices and I am going to look at the airline industry, and I am going to look at the weather forecast, and I am going to look at the number of clicks, and I'm going to be automatically adjusting your price, and I'm going to look at your thumbs up and your thumbs down on TripAdvisor and the number of little circles you have, and I'm going to be adjusting your price. And it's like, wait, are you telling me that I'm going to get a different price change every hour? And there's no boundaries? So at 1 o'clock, my price for tomorrow could be $100, and an hour later it could be $200 because I got a lot of clicks. It's like, wait a second, did you test this? So there was a lot of great ideas that had a theoretical incremental revenue, but the reality of putting that into an operational environment, or the cost of data to get that data, or the cost of the processing, ended up being unprofitable in the end. Either there was absolutely no change because of the algorithm, or the algorithm it was such a small incremental revenue and such a high cost that there was no benefit. So you can have both scenarios. And so I always strongly recommend, if you have a third-party vendor or you have an internal team, don't push out complexity for the sake of complexity, right? Push out, make changes because it's going to improve the lives of the users, the lives of your customers, or your bottom line. Or your bottom line, right? You want to make improvements. You don't want to make changes just for the sake of it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Very good point. Any final comments on that, David? Did you want to?
No, not really.
Okay.
I think Nancy put it better than I could have. It's true. I just wanted to say that the fifth one, if we move on to that one, is that it's actually a similar one, but it's a more of an academic interest. So
this being the price update frequency, yeah.
I mean, it could be also for a company. Of course, a company might might want to update more frequently, check their data streams more frequently. But it is something that Maxime has encountered in his research, which is a question of how often should we rerun the optimization? Is this something that, and there is no definitive answer, and it's probably something that depends on certain features of your booking patterns. And that's the kind of academic question that you can go out, answer, and then you can put, potentially publish and then put back into your engine, and then you can end the discussion around how often should I be updating. Well, there is proof that you don't need any more than every hour, every day, depending on if your hotel is like this or your hotel is like that.
That makes sense. Anything to add to that, Nancy?
I think that there are products out there that only do once a day, and there's products that out there that do every hour, and there's products out there that do X number of times during the day, usually 4 or 5 times a day. And it is truly the things you have to be aware of with those intradays are how much of a change are you going to allow within a day, and how much, and again, how much data do you need to make a good decision? So if your bookings are so low that you're only getting 3 or 4 reservations in a time frame between optimizations, is 3 or 4 reservations sufficient data to change your booking, your booking rate? Is it sufficient to change a price? And is it because the system had an expectation of getting 10 bookings and it only got 3, so it said, "Ooh, that price is too high," or is it really it only expected 3, it got 3, but now it's re-optimizing? So the question of the frequency is, as David said, it's really dependent upon your booking pace, your intraday booking pace, and the density of that intraday booking pace. So you want to make sure if you have re-optimizations that they are targeted to the time frame when you expect reservations to be coming in, not just, I'm going to set an optimization at 10, 2, 4, and 6. Right? If all your reservations are coming in between 4 and 8 p.m., then having those earlier day optimizations isn't going to do you any good. So it's something that you can test this, and it's relatively straightforward to test because it's generally configurable parameters. Now, if you're with a system that only has once a day, you might want to reevaluate that system because you're not even getting the flexibility when you have when you have a strong booking pace for a given day. Things can change during the day, right? If you're in a city and the hurricane has been declared and all of a sudden you're getting an influx of people running away from the town 100 miles away, then if you only have a once a day price change, not to say we want to take advantage of hurricane surviving people, but if you only have a limited number of rooms in your hotel, so you want to be able to optimally allocate that demand and make sure that your resources are being priced appropriately. So things can happen during the day, and if you don't have any facility to make that change, then you are limiting your capabilities to generate some incremental revenue, but you want to make sure that you have appropriately configured those intradays based on the density and the booking pace you're getting.
And I think in the last 3 that we've been discussing, so the choice of the revenue management system, the looking at the algorithms, if we pull that out, and then the pricing update, you've almost got 2 sides of the equation here, haven't you? You've got the user side that can be testing. So if there is a new algorithm change, testing that it's going to have a value. If you're choosing or upgrading your RMS, testing that it's going to be better or you're making the right choice. Testing the frequency, does it match for what you actually need? And then on the other side, if this is what I was picking up from you, David, is that it then also applies back into the RMS providers. So, there is an onus on the RMS providers to be showing that when you say you can deliver certain levels of revenue, you can, and you can test it. If you're improving the algorithm to test the algorithm to be able to show that there is the value, and if you're exploring a greater frequency of updates, be able to at least put forward why that would be of potentially benefit to the hotel client. Did I understand that correctly?
There is. But one thing that when we talk about challenges later, one thing that we mention in the paper is that part of the reason why RMS providers maybe are not going to show so much of this work is that it will not necessarily be valued. So I think if hotels, hotel chains in particular, are more used to doing A/B tests for testing their ancillary pricing or promotions or distribution, then they're going to say, well, I know how these things work. They're going to go back to the RMS providers and say, well, let's do one. When we upgrade, we are definitely going to do one of these tests because we do them. Mm-hmm. And then the RMS providers are going to be on top of it, and very quickly they're going to be doing A/B testing and field experimentation. But of course, right now, that's not really necessarily how it works. There are a lot of other decisions that come into play when deciding between RMS providers, and field experimentation is oftentimes not the one that is at the top.
As we move into the third section, we hear from Nancy and David on the 3 core challenges faced when trying to conduct statistical field experimentation.
Yeah, I actually think scientific challenges is a good place to start, because that's what we try to address more with the paper. Mm-hmm. The scientific challenges arise very simply from the fact that, unlike in marketing, where you can send, for instance, an email to with one format to half the customers and an email with a different format to the other half, so you can split your audience perfectly. In revenue management, because of the complex distribution that hotels have, you cannot. Yeah. So you cannot show one price or 2 prices at the same time to 2 different people. Mm-hmm. So that immediately means that you're going to devise more complex ways of building these experiments. So more specifically, those scientific challenges mean that you are probably going to have to either show the same product with a different price at a different time, but then you wonder whether the perception of the cost has varied, or you might have to show a different product. Mm-hmm. So for instance, if you're splitting and saying, oh, my revenue strategy A is in this hotel, and my revenue strategy B is applied in this other hotel, those are different products. Yeah. They're not the same. Yeah. So it's which means you need to do some work to control for factors that might not be under your control. The same thing if you show the same room but for different reservation nights, mm-hmm. right? You say, well, I'm gonna use this strategy for Mondays, and this or the first Monday of the month, and this strategy for the second Monday of the month. Well, that's actually a different product. It's the same room, but it's a different time. Mm-hmm. So what that does is it violates, if you just do those comparisons like that, it violates something called the stable unit treatment value assumption, right? Which is a fundamental assumption of A/B testing. Okay. So if you want to run a field experiment in this kind of context, well, you're going to have to control for a lot of things, a lot of covariates, things that could impact, basically things that could impact the revenue that you generate that are not your revenue strategy. Mm-hmm. So you can say, oh, I made more money with B. Well, yeah, but that was a Saturday, and you used A on a Monday. That's a classic, effect. But there are also others that are more complex. Such as cannibalization, right? The fact that if you are treating 2 hotels differently and they're close by, maybe what you're doing is actually pushing the customers that were choosing between the 2 to 1,
Yeah.
And then at the end of the experiment, you're like, oh, that one hotel is doing better. But when you implement the same strategy in both, then they don't do actually better.
No, that makes sense.
So there are all these complex scientific challenges which have been solved in other contexts, but they do mean that you need to put a lot more work into designing an experiment. So you need a lot more people, a lot more expertise. And one of the goals of the paper was to try to reduce the barrier to entry by proposing these designs that helped mitigate some of the scientific challenges and if you need and reduce the level of expertise that you need in your team basically to implement them.
No, that makes sense.
So that's why I think the scientific challenges are good to start with, because they are at the root of why we wrote the paper.
Well, everything else kind of follows on from that as well, doesn't it? Because to solve that scientific challenge, you need, I guess you're facing the other challenges that you highlight in the white paper to try and resolve those problems.
Yes. So then we have the technological and the organizational that we also highlighted. But I'll let Nancy comment on the scientific before we move on.
Yes, bring you in, Nancy.
Yeah, I kind of see them as three parts of the same problem, which is you need people who understand the problem and can set up an effective test and run that effective test.
Yeah.
And the organizational challenges, a lot of times there's just no budget to hire technical in-house people, which means you have to go to third-party vendors. So then you have to evaluate those third-party vendors. And if you don't have internal expertise, trying to figure out, again, you're in sales meetings where people are all claiming to be the best person and the best team for your job. So you're faced with attempting to choose between, if you know nothing about cars, then what do you rely on? You rely on marketing, and you rely on your friends, and you rely on the price.
Yeah.
Right? Essentially, that's what you're going to do. So that's what a lot of technology lacking entities that need some technological advice, they end up relying on things that might not really result in a good product, and then they get a bad taste in their mouth, and then they don't want to spend money doing something that they feel was a waste.
Yeah.
The design of your experiment is, as David said, the design of that experiment, how many times do you see something in the news where, whether it's meat is bad for you or meat is good for you. And I don't know if you've ever actually clicked on those links, but a lot of times you'll see that the studies that it was based on, there was no control.
No.
Or it was all self-reporting, or it was all, there was no scientific rigor to the underlying report, and they did all the statistical analysis on something that had no scientific rigor.
Mm-hmm.
So on the outside, it was this great study, but when you really look at the inside, there was no foundation for it. And I've seen lots of studies set up where people thought, oh, this is what we'll do for our test and control. It's like, that's not test and control. As David mentioned, you have two hotels that are across the street from each other, and you change the pricing, and all you're doing is pushing demand between those two hotels. So it's not independent. And so trying to figure out what the true good test of your system is can become challenging and frustrating. And so then we go to that third technology challenge, which, do you have the ability to have, go back to that prototype where we say, let's put two different hotel, RMSs in the hotels, where we're testing this new product in hotel A and B, and then having our old product in C, D, and F. Well, can your central reservation system accept changes to the input? How much is it going to cost to change your prototype RMS system to work with your existing PMS and MCR system? So there could be technological changes that it's like, well, it could be done, but it's going to cost you $100,000 just to do this prototype test.
Yeah. It's
like, oh, well, that's not a good solution. So there are barriers to entry, but as David said, our objective was to help people understand that they're not insurmountable, and you can cost in a cost-effective way, overcome them, and that the long-term benefit is almost always the long-term benefit is going to outweigh the upfront cost. But trying to get justification for that upfront cost, trying to understand why you need to make that upfront cost, and moving forward with it can sometimes be very challenging if there's not enough technological resources within your company.
Well, that was a question I was going to ask, and David, if there's anything to pick up from what Nancy said, please come back on it. But you're thinking of it again, back to the ethos of what this is all about, i.e. the testing. To be able to get that justification to do it on a wide scale is going to be quite difficult to do, but maybe finding one idea or two ideas that you want to try and you want to test, to bring it to actually test the testing, so to speak, to prove that it has value, I guess is one way to go. But then it did pose the question to me, because from what I read through the paper, it seemed very clear through all that was written that there isn't a system out there, and the technology stack and the kind of slightly disparate ways in which that comes together and the user journey adds to some of these complexities, that there isn't a simple tech solution that can help you to devise, kind of implement and analyze. So in a way, and if you don't have that skill internally, then you do have to go out to a third party to get somebody to put that together for you. So I guess if you can see strategically it's worth doing, you've almost, seems to me, you've got to go onto like a small enough scale to be able to justify the budget, to be able to engage a third party to help do this, because you really need data scientists, and organizationally, we know hotels value to differing degree revenue managers from one extreme to the other. So now adding another layer around it is going to potentially be a hard sell. So making it small enough to be able to justify that, to then come back and prove that the testing works. I mean, can you jump? Do you see what I'm driving at there? Jump in across that.
I think you're trying to think about the implementation aspect of it, and I mean, I will do a shameless plug here.
From the hotel point of view,
yeah. I'll do a shameless plug and say that, of course, Pace has been developing and is available for some of our customers, these kind of capabilities, right? I mean, that's part of the reason why I was working on this.
Sure.
But the reality is that your question is still very valid. It's how do you go from where we are to where we think we should be? And I would say that right now, maybe it takes your organization, I mean, it depends on what kind of test you're doing, but let's say that it takes 5 data scientists, 10 engineers, and it's just a number, and 3 months or 6 months to do an A/B test if you're a big chain, right? The objective ultimately of anything that should be built, and this paper and whatever papers will be written on this, which is what we want to trigger, a bit of a conversation, should be to reduce these to like 1 data scientist or 2 data scientists. But that will not happen overnight.
No, sure.
The first thing that you would want to get rid of the engineering team as much as you can there. If you have a tool that can do the execution and can give you access to the data for the analysis, then you don't need the engineering team. Now, we go back to the technological challenges, which are like there are thousands of PMSs in the world, and there are CRSs, there are less of those, so you could connect to the CRSs, you could build a tool that is a standalone and connects to RMSs. There are also less RMSs that, because you have all the information that you need there. But then CRS and RMS adoption is not very wide. It's not all hotels that have a CRS or an RMS. So if you actually want wide adoption of these, until the PMS landscape is such that most PMSs are easy to integrate with and have an API, and then you can it's cheap or free to integrate with them and get the data, which is true with some of the modern PMSs, it is not going to be possible. Now, for us, we need to be forward looking and say, well, we don't need the 200,000 hotels above 20 rooms in the world to be doing field experiments right now.
Sure.
I mean, maybe that is, 20 years from now, that's where we want to be. But for now, we can start with those that have the right PMSs so that it's a low cost for them. And we can provide with some technological solutions that help them somewhat. So it eliminates that engineering team, maybe even eliminates most of the data scientists, because we can do that in-house, or some consultant can do that. I think that's basically sort of like some of the intermediate steps that will reduce the cost. Yeah. But we are not naive about it. I think the wider adoption will start in bigger chains, and then it will slowly percolate. Yeah, but I think it's a transformational thing. It will have to be transformational also in what a revenue management role looks like. Yeah. The revenue manager may become more analytical in these kind of tools and less in the kind of tools that maybe they were using 20 years ago. Yeah. It's a long process, and we just want to...
Yeah, it's an evolution, isn't it?
Exactly, want to get it started.
In this section, we are joined again by Maxime and David. We hear from both on how do you take the scientific challenge highlighted in the last section and develop experimental designs to try and help tackle that challenge.
Yes, so maybe I can give you the outline, and then Maxime can go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah.
But we had basically 3 designs, and I think they have different levels of granularity in what questions they can answer. But they also have different levels of complexity in their implementation. So there is a trade-off there that one has to play with whenever they are thinking about implementing these designs in real life. But another important aspect is that these 3 designs are complementary, because they tackle different granularities. They can actually answer different questions. So the first one was property splits, which was motivated by the fact that this is the design that has actually been run in big chains. And the idea is that you run your, the main idea is you run your one revenue strategy in a set of properties, and then in the other half of your properties, you run a different revenue strategy. Not quite as simple as that, but that's sort of like the main idea.
That's the broad brush, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the idea, that's not very granular in the sense that you cannot answer questions about one property. You can answer questions that apply to the whole group. So it's interesting, of course, if you're upgrading your revenue management system, you want to know, which is a better one for my whole group. But for a lot of the smaller groups, or even for some questions, it might not make sense to ask the question that globally. You may want to talk at the property level or few property levels and do experiments like that. And that's why we introduce the alternating periods.
Okay.
And then the idea there is that you can actually answer questions at the property level by running different strategies on different reservation nights. And then finally, we had a third design that I think is the most complex in terms of technology, but it is, I think, quite interesting because it actually allows you to go to the granularity of a few nights. And the idea here is that instead of splitting your customers by reservation night, you're going to actually allocate half of your inventory to one algorithm, half to another, or a different strategy. And then you're going to show different customers according to when they go to book a different strategy.
Okay.
So if you go in the morning, some mornings you're going to find strategy 1. If you go some other mornings, you're going to find a strategy 2. And that, again, allows you to answer questions that are a lot more granular at the level of the room night, potentially.
No, that makes sense.
Maxime, so that's the big overview.
Yeah. Maxime, do you want to sort of add into that?
Yeah. So I think David gave a very good high-level introduction about the 3 experimental designs we proposed in the paper. So just again, to add a little bit more detail, the first experimental design is called property splits. So we propose that if you want to test two strategies, let's say first strategy is to give a 10% discount, second strategy give a 20% discount, and you would like to compare them carefully. So the idea to propose there is to select two properties. In this case, will be two different hotels. On one of the hotel, you're going to test strategy A. On the other hotel, you're going to test strategy B.
Yep.
So there are obviously pros and cons to this. And the main challenge is to select the two properties that are as similar as possible, right? You want them to be very similar. If you compare apples to oranges, like you can't really get some clear conclusions.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot of work to be done, and we elaborate quite a bit on the paper on how can one select two properties that are comparable in other words, in a way so that we can really get some clear conclusion about the comparisons.
Yeah.
So that's for the first one. The limitation is you need to get multiple properties. If you have only a single property, or if all your properties are not comparable to each other, let's say you have like a hotel in each different country, then you can probably not use this design. And therefore, as David mentioned, we believe that the three experimental design we propose in the paper should be seen as complementary to each other instead of really competing.
Understood. And also picked up something in there as well, that there may be a challenge if you've got two properties that are close by, that you succeed in one strategy, but it actually then creates a negative impact. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, you did. So those type of effects are sometimes called network effects or cannibalization effects. And it's a sense like if you test one strategy in a hotel and the other one is really competing, meaning like they share some demand, people are kind of going to one or the other, then obviously if the strategy of Hotel A affects the demand or the availability of Hotel B, this can create a lot of interference in the experiment, and therefore the result will be biased and should be like somewhat like, discarded or corrected in some level. So that's a very good point.
No, that makes sense. And then the alternating periods?
Yeah, so the second design, as you say, it's called alternating periods. So here's the advantage is you can do it on a single property if you want. Of course, you can also combine it on multiple properties. And the idea there is to alternate time periods between strategy A and strategy B. For example, you can do 2 weeks of strategy A, 2 weeks of strategy B, 2 weeks of strategy A, and just keeping alternating between them.
I'm with you.
It's not perfect either, because seasonality effects can be different from 1 week to the other. And therefore, you can always, again, end up comparing apples to oranges, but there are some easy way of controlling for seasonality. Now, another big question in this particular design is what should be the length of a period? Should you alternate every week, every 2 weeks, every 2 days, every 2 months? And also in the paper, we elaborate a little bit of giving some type of guiding rules on how to find the best window of the alternating periods.
I'm with you. Excellent. And then the final scenario was the high frequency price updates.
Totally correct. So third proposed design, we call it high frequency price updates. And as David said, we can do it on a much smaller level of granularity. There you can really look at the stay night level. You don't have to look at a 2 weeks or 1 week or entire property. You can look really at single route type, single stay night, and you can change the strategy A between strategy A and B very fast, every 2 hours, every 3 hours, by splitting your inventory accordingly. This one, on some level, is the most attractive because you can get some reliable results very fast, but at the same time, it requires a more sophisticated system for the execution of the experimentation, which not a lot of hotels can do currently.
Yeah, and I think that's what struck me when I was looking at them. And again, I emphasize, I'm not a data scientist, I'm not a professor, so I was looking at it and getting my head. But as you say, they seem to narrow down in terms of the granularity as you went through the property splits to the alternating periods to the high frequency price. And I could imagine if I was sitting there as a revenue manager, I would probably lean towards scenario 3 as thinking, oh, that could have some real relevance to me right here, right now. But then, as you say, the technology isn't necessarily there to be able to necessarily fulfill that requirement. Is that right?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one. That's sort of the issue. I think when the property splits have been implemented, they have been implemented manually. So oftentimes you'll have one system in one property and one in another. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't be easier to do it if you had better technology, but you can do it. You can do it manually, and it's possible. The alternating periods one, you can imagine doing it manually, but it's a lot more overhead. And the reality is that actually Pace, one of the things that we built as part of our product, is something that helps you with executing that.
Okay.
The last one, it's also something that is not extremely hard to build. It's slightly harder for a technology provider, but the main issue there is that you don't depend fully on yourself either. Now you're going to depend on the PMS and the channel manager to propagate the rates quickly to all the distribution channels. So all of a sudden, I think it's a lot narrower, and I'm pretty sure that modern PMSs and modern channel managers, I will not name names, of course, but I'm pretty sure that with them as partners, you could implement this kind of experiment, but that limits very much the adoption. Even if you have an experimentation system that helps you with it, you're not going to get to a lot of clients because the PMS and the channel manager need to go hand in hand.
So that has covered the core elements of the white paper, touching on 4 key sections. What is statistical field experimentation? Scenarios where this experimentation could be beneficial in the hotel sector, practical challenges faced, and finally, experimental design to overcome the scientific challenge. But before we wrap up, let's hear once more from David as to what he hopes this paper will achieve.
One of the goals of this paper was really to start a conversation. We think that this is a very useful tool, as it has been proven in other industries, and we want to be part of the solution and the people that help push this industry forward with more quantitative methods. So we are here to start and to continue the conversation around field experimentation.
So that is the end of our discussion, and I hope it was of interest. I'd like to thank David, Maxime and Nancy for finding the time to join me and talk through the white paper, and I'd also like to thank them for putting the white paper together in the first instance and getting this conversation started. I would strongly recommend you download and read it, and the link is in the notes below. Finally, if you have any thoughts on the areas discussed, please let us know in the comments below, and I will follow up with our 3 guests on any questions or points made. We welcome your input. Thanks for watching.